World War II did not start overnight. Nor was it the result of a single decision. It was the outcome of a tension that had accumulated for years. A chain of political movements, ambitions, and mistakes that were pushing the world towards a point of no return. After the First World War, Europe was deeply altered. The balance was broken, and open wounds emerged in its place. Resentments and new ideologies ready to impose themselves. Germany, weakened by the Treaty of Versailles, began to transform. Under the leadership of Hitler, the country began a process of expansion. Not only territorial, but also ideological. Meanwhile, other powers watched. Some with concern, others with doubts, and many without reacting in time. In 1938, the European map began to change without the need for a major battle. Austria was incorporated into the Third Reich. And shortly after, the focus shifted to Czechoslovakia. Tensions were rising. But instead of a firm response, agreements were chosen. Decisions that sought to avoid conflict. But in reality, they only delayed it. The so-called Munich Pact allowed Germany to advance without immediate opposition, and revealed a key weakness in Europe: the inability to stop an expansion that had no intention of stopping. Months later, Czechoslovakia was dismantled. And the message was clear. International balance no longer existed. In parallel, new alliances were being formed. Germany and Italy consolidated their cooperation, while other powers tried to reorganize without a clear strategy. But the definitive point would come in 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. There were no more excuses, no room to avoid conflict. The war had begun. The war did not break out suddenly, was activated as the inevitable result of a chain of decisions, calculation errors, and ambition. Europe was tense, but still did not understand what was coming. Germany was not looking for a long war, it was looking for speed. A new way of fighting based on total coordination, blitzkrieg. Tanks advancing without stopping, aviation destroying communications, infantry occupying what was left behind. The objective was not to resist, but to overwhelm the enemy before they could react. Poland was the first stage. On September 1, 1939, the attack began. Within days, the Polish defenses collapsed, not because of lack of courage, but because of the difference in strategy. While they fought in the west, the Soviet Union advanced from the east. Poland was divided. The message was clear: the war had changed. But Europe did not react with the necessary urgency. France and Britain declared war, but did not attack. There was a strange pause, a war without movement. An illusion of time that Germany was not going to waste. In 1940, the next step began. Denmark fell almost without resistance. Norway was quickly occupied. Control of the north was essential: minerals, sea routes, strategic positions. The Allies tried to react, but they were late. The German machine continued to advance. The real objective was France. A military power secure in its defense, protected by the Maginot Line, fortifications, walls and artillery designed to stop any invasion. But the war was no longer fought like that. Germany did not attack head-on, it surrounded. Through Belgium, Luxembourg and the Ardennes Forest, an area that the French considered impassable, but it wasn't. The tanks advanced, breaking the lines and completely disorganizing the enemy. Speed changed everything. Communications failed, commanders could not react and orders arrived too late. The front collapsed. Thousands of Allied soldiers were trapped at Dunkirk in a desperate retreat. More than 200,000 troops were evacuated in an operation to the limit, but the damage had already been done. France was lost. Paris fell, the government collapsed, and the Vichy regime was born. A divided, occupied, and subjugated France. But not everyone accepted defeat. From London, Charles de Gaulle organized the resistance, Free France. The war continued. Britain was left alone, isolated, but firm. Hitler knew that he could not invade without dominating the air. The Battle of Britain then began. Constant bombings, cities attacked, infrastructure destroyed, but British resistance was decisive. German aviation failed to gain control. For the first time, the expansion stopped. The invasion was cancelled and the war entered a new phase. Meanwhile, other scenarios were beginning to activate. In Africa, Italy was trying to expand. In Asia, Japan watched. And in the East, tension was growing. Hitler already had another objective, the Soviet Union. But first, Europe had to be secured. In 1941, the war was expanding. The Balkans were occupied, Greece fell, and Yugoslavia was invaded. Control of the continent was advancing, but the balance was fragile. Because each victory brought a greater conflict closer. And then, the world changed definitively. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Japanese planes attacked the American base and in less than an hour the fleet was devastated. The United States entered the war. The conflict stopped being European, it became global. The Axis powers now faced a gigantic industrial force, and the scenario changed completely. In 1942, the lines were already defined. Germany dominated much of Europe, but had not managed to win. Great Britain resisted, the Soviet Union prepared, and the United States began to mobilize. The war would no longer be quick. It would become attrition, resistance, survival. And the next move would be the most brutal of all. The Eastern Front. The war was entering its final phase, but that didn't mean it was easier, just more relentless. Europe was already completely torn apart. Cities in ruins, borders broken, and millions of lives marked forever. Still, the end had not yet come. From the west, the Allies advanced with determination. From the east, the Red Army pushed without stopping. Germany was slowly being caught in a pincer movement, with no way out. Every day they lost ground, every day the regime weakened more, but they still resisted. Hitler was no longer leading a war, he was leading an inevitable collapse. In April 1945, in the heart of Berlin, surrounded by destruction, he made his final decision. There was no escape, there was no negotiation, just silence. Shortly after, Germany surrendered. On May 7, the surrender was signed. In Europe, the war was over. But the world was still on fire. In the Pacific, the conflict continued with brutal intensity. It was not a quick war, it was slow, exhausting, an island-by-island fight. Japan defended each position until the last moment. Each advance cost thousands of lives. The United States was advancing, but the price was enormous. Then the point of no return arrived. In July 1945, the Allies issued a clear ultimatum: unconditional surrender, or total destruction. Japan did not respond. On August 6, Hiroshima changed history. A single bomb, and a city disappeared in seconds. The impact was immediate, devastating, impossible to understand. But it wasn't enough. 3 days later, Nagasaki. The message was already definitive. The world had entered a new era, an era in which destruction could be instantaneous. Japan finally surrendered. On September 2, 1945, the war officially ended. But what was left behind was immense, millions of dead, entire cities reduced to ashes, and a humanity completely transformed. And as the weapons died down, something new began to emerge. Two blocks, two visions of the world, two ways of understanding power. The West and the Soviet Union. The war was over, but the tension was not. At the same time, in the shadows, another story had been unfolding all along: the resistance. Ordinary people, without armies, without resources, but with absolute determination. In France, Poland, Yugoslavia, they sabotaged, they spied, they fought in silence. They weren't looking to conquer, they were looking to survive. Some managed to turn the tide in small battles, others were mercilessly crushed, but all left a mark. In Eastern Europe, the war was even harsher. Civilians were not spectators, they were part of the conflict. Entire towns disappeared, entire families were lost. And in Asia, the Japanese occupation sparked new resistance movements. Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, regions where the fight was not only against an army, but for freedom. The end of the war did not bring immediate peace. It brought a world divided, a world rebuilding, a world that had seen too much. And that he would never be the same again. The Second World War was not just an armed conflict. It was a total transformation of the world. It started in 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, triggering a chain reaction. Great Britain and France declared war. And Europe was caught in a conflict that would expand rapidly. In a few months, German blitzkrieg strategy devastated entire countries. Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, until France fell in 1940. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom resisted, alone, under constant bombardment, in the Battle of Britain. But the war was not limited to Europe. In Asia, Japan expanded its dominance. And in 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor led to the entry of the United States into the conflict. The whole world was at war. That same year, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, opening the most brutal front of the conflict, where millions would die. In cities like Stalingrad. As the war progressed, the violence reached unimaginable levels. The Nazi regime created a network of concentration camps, places where millions of people were exploited, tortured, and murdered. Jews, political opponents, intellectuals, all those considered enemies. They were dehumanized, converted into numbers, and systematically exterminated. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. Names that were engraved as a symbol of horror. In parallel, entire cities were destroyed, devastated infrastructures, and millions of people were left homeless. But the course of the war began to change. In 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy, marking the beginning of the end for Germany. From the east, the Soviet army advanced unstoppable, and in 1945, Berlin fell. Hitler committed suicide, and Germany surrendered. But the war had not ended yet. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destruction was total, and Japan surrendered a few days later. The conflict had ended, but its consequences, they would mark the future of the world. Europe was left devastated. Millions of dead, cities in ruins, and 2 great powers emerged: United States and the Soviet Union. A new era was beginning. The Cold War. A divided world. Tense and marked forever for the memory of the most destructive war in history. And when everything ended, there was no immediate relief. Not a real celebration. What remained was an exhausted world, marked and fully aware of what had just happened. But the real question is not just how it happened, but why. The Second World War was not an accident. Not even an isolated incident. It was the result of accumulated decisions, of excessive ambitions, and ideologies that sought to impose themselves at any cost. Of a poorly built peace, and of a balance that never managed to stabilize. When fear, ambition, and power overcome reason, the conflict ceases to be a possibility, and it becomes an inevitable consequence. What happened between 1939 and 1945 was not just a war. It was a warning. A warning about what can happen when the world ignores the signs and allows the story to advance uncontrollably.